Now, tonight we have a Canadian astrologer. His name is Alan Anand, and he's going to give us a presentation on a magical yoga, that Parivartana that we all struggle with. Now, I would like to introduce this fine man, and Alan, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, well, thanks, Phyllis. So my name is Alan Anand. I'm a Canadian. I live in Toronto. I've been involved in astrology professionally for well over 30 years, I guess. I started in Western astrology. I first studied on my own, and then I studied with the Faculty of Astrological Studies in England, and got a diploma from them. And for about 5 years, I was a tutor for their international correspondence course with students throughout North America. Years went by, and I was practicing on a regular basis using Western astrology, and I was always attempting to make predictions like every astrologer wants to. And I thought that, I had a very good theoretical grounding in astrology. I worked hard at analyzing charts, but I found that, I was not succeeding with predictions. So I thought, well, okay, either I'm not such a good astrologer, or could it be the methodology I'm using is not so great? So around about that time, a girlfriend during the period gave me a book on Vedic astrology, and I started to read it, and I almost threw it away because, converting from tropical to sidereal zodiac, I went from a Leo ascendant to a Cancer ascendant, and a Sagittarius moon to a Scorpio moon. And I thought, that can't be me. I set the book aside, but after a while I went back to it and I thought, okay, you know what? This really does describe me better than Western astrology. So I persevered. I studied for several years on my own. And then I went to an ACVA conference in the US and, bought software, a suitcase full of books, and studied more. And at the ACVA conference, somebody had said, "Oh, you're Canadian. You must know Hart Defoe." And I said, "Well, no, I never heard of him before." They said, "Well, he lives in Toronto and he's a brilliant astrologer and especially a brilliant teacher." So I reached out and found him, and he wasn't really doing consultations much anymore for normal people like me. But I said, you've got to see me because I'm a, professional astrologer and I want to switch from Western to Vedic astrology. And he consented, and I went for a consultation. It was, quite illuminating. And so it it lit a fire under me. So I said, if you ever give courses, please let me know. So within about a year, he gave a weekend seminar in Vedic astrology on compatibility. I went to that, and I really liked him as a teacher. I said, I'll take more. And then the year after that, he started his series in New Mexico with the Foundation, Intermediate, and Advanced Trilogy program. And there was no looking back after that. I just proceeded with my studies. And I then got certification from ACVA as well, too. And have continued after that, then giving consultations and starting to write about Vedic astrology through my blog.
Alan, that is fantastic. And what you have just expressed about your travel is so common. You could put my words in your mouth and it would be just about the same.
Similar journey.
So many of us have had the privilege, I think, of coming through Western astrology and finding this. And now we have the task of balancing the two of them. So I'm going to try and do that someday, if I live so long.
Well, it's a lifelong journey. One thing I realized, with Western astrology, at one point after writing my exams and getting certified by them, I actually naively thought I knew everything about Western astrology. But despite many more years of study, dedicated study in Vedic astrology and Jyotish, I have never said that to myself. Oh yeah, now I know it all. No way.
Oh, no.
It's a constant learning experience.
I agree with you. I unfortunately, many years ago, was in that state of thinking that I had seen the light and I knew it all.
Yeah.
And now I know that I know nothing.
Yeah,
nothing.
Well, it's a wise person who knows that he or she.
Well, I've heard that before, and I don't know how wise I am. All I know for sure is I'm not too bright. Anyway, Alan, this is wonderful. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say about the Parivartana, because although that's common, it sure trips us up. So please take it away and charm us.
Okay. Well, just before I launch into the presentation itself, just a quick preamble about why this came about. ACVA, for their second level certification, you had the option of doing, I think, 10 or 12 chart analyses in significant detail, like, you're supposed to write about 5 pages on each. Well, I'd done something similar for level 1, like you had to write a 3-page analysis for each. And then I could have done more of the same for level 2. But one of the options that they had was write a thesis. Mm-hmm. So write a 10,000-word thesis. So, well, I've been a lifelong writer, so writing is very comfortable for me, and the thought of writing 10,000 words is no impediment, right? So I thought, okay, that would be interesting, and maybe I could find some worthy topic that I could sink my teeth into. So I looked around a little bit, and lo and behold, I don't know what made it pop up, Parivartana Yoga. In Paladipaka, there's maybe 2 pages written about Parivartana Yoga, but nowhere else. I mean, passing reference here and there in some books, but nothing in any detail whatsoever. And I thought, oh my God, this would seem to be a gold mine. There are, 66 combinations, and so each of these could be described, and with a little, a sample chart for each. And so that's what I embarked upon. So my target was a 10,000-word thesis for ACVA. I started writing, and oh my God, before I know it, I've got 30,000 words. Well, anyway, I stopped it there, I submitted it, and I received a lot of congratulations for that. And then it sat kind of in the back burner for, several years, until I realized, I should turn this into a book. So I went back at it again, did some more research, really fleshed out my case studies, and the result now is this book. Yeah, so anyway, just a preamble, why did this even come about? So let me go to the presentation, and we'll touch upon the highlights of Parivartana Yoga, and it'll kind of be a plug for the book as well, too, which has, certainly a wealth of detail. Okay, so let me see if I can, skip my way through this technology. Share screen, okay.
Okay.
Find my little tool here, and there we go. Okay, so Paladipaka, as I said, is one of the few books that spends more than a few words on Parivartana Yoga, and there's a definition, and it's really quite simple. It's simply if 2 planets each occupy each other's own sign. And of course, when sign and house are equal, as they are in Vedic astrology, you basically end up with a kind of an exchange between signs, but those planets occupy houses, so that becomes a house exchange, and that's the vital thing. So that's Parivartana Yoga. Okay, why is my screen not advancing? There we go. So, yoga simply means sambandha, a bond, and Parivartana means many things, if you look at the Sanskrit roots. But the key thing is highlighted here. It is an exchange between 2 things. And so that's the root meaning for Parivartana Yoga. So Paladipaka talks about there are 3 main classes of Parivartana Yoga. And so it's really quite simple. In any given chart, we can divide the chart into positive houses and negative houses. And the positive houses are generally acknowledged to be these: 1, 2, 4, 5, 7, 9, 10, and 11. So if you have any exchange among those house lords, you have what we call a Maha Parivartana Yoga, which is basically considered to be fortunate, as we might construe, because they're positive house lords. In exchange, the results should be positive when they operate conjointly. So combinations, there are 28 of those. Now, then in negative houses, we generally, when we say dishtanas, we typically think 3, 6, 8, and 12. But even there are distinctions. The third house is considered a mild dishtana, while 6, 8, and 12 are dishtanas with a little bit more of an edge, and we call them trikishtanas. So we separate those two. And so Akala Yoga, which is a touch of trouble, because the third house is a mild dhisthana, and it combines with any one of those positive lords that we indicated above, 1, 2, 4, 5, 7, 9, 10, 11, combined with the third, in exchange with the third, that'll give us Kala. So, it's slightly troublesome. And as we'll see in the examples, it's a bit of an irritant, and it doesn't necessarily spoil a life, but it, makes a person edgy or rebellious or gets them into some degree of trouble. Danya, on the other hand, is, quite implies misfortunes of some kind or another, because now we're dealing strictly with the Trikishtana lords 6, 8, and 12. I shouldn't say strictly with them. 6, 8, and 12, the lords of 6, 8, and 12, in exchange with any of the other houses, the positive houses or the third house. And there are 30 such combinations. But the contamination arises from the Trikishtanas. As we know, they bring trouble of some kind or other. And that's why they are considered to be misfortunate, unfortunate, troublesome combinations. So, I amuse myself by getting into the mathematics of these combinations, and I won't go into this too heavily, but there are in total 66 combinations of house lord exchange. I mean, there's 1 and 2, 1 and 3, 1 and 4, 1 and 5, etc., and then 2 and 3, 2 and 4, 2 and 5, etc., 3 and 4, 3 and 5. Go around the chart, you get 66. But for any given chart, you will not have 66 possibilities in a single chart. Let me give you one simple example. If you have Aries rising, that means Scorpio is in the 8th house. Therefore, you cannot have an exchange between the 1st and the 8th house, because they are one and the same planet. And so for any given chart, there are 5 possibilities eliminated, because we have 5 what we call true planets: Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, Saturn. Each own 2 houses in your chart. Well, they cannot exchange with each other. Saturn will own, for Cancer rising, Saturn, no, that's not a good example, but I'll stick with the example that I gave. With Aries rising, there can be no exchange between the 1st and the 8th. And so on for these other planets that own 2 signs. And then there are some astronomical realities. For instance, Gemini and Libra are separated by 120 degrees. Yet the lords of those 2 signs, Mercury and Venus respectively, cannot be cannot flip signs and be in Libra and Gemini, because Mercury and Venus astronomically can never be more than 76 degrees apart. So there's a few other combinations: Sun and Mercury, Sun and Venus, Mercury and Venus, where some of these exchanges are disabled. Anyway, long story short, in any given chart, you can have 57 different combinations of sign lord exchange. When I did, I had a database to work with, Astro Databank, back in the day, and I searched and found all charts with Parivartana Yoga. And it turned out that 43% of all charts have at least one Parivartana Yoga. And you can work this through mathematically as well, to just on the basis of logic, and I've done that in one of the articles that's in my on my website, navamsha.com. 3% of all charts have two Parivartanas, and a very, very rare 0.03%, that's 3/100ths of 1%, have three Parivartanas. And of course, it's not possible to have four Parivartanas because that would require 8 planets in exchange, and that's just not possible. No such thing exists. Anyway, so the mathematics is interesting. What is interesting about this, or what's germane to this discussion, is that if you see 100 clients in a year or in a quarter or whatever, 43% of them will have a Parivartana Yoga in their chart. 43% of all people have a Parivartana Yoga. That's huge. That means like almost every second client you see will have a Parivartana Yoga. If you know how to interpret Parivartana Yoga, you will have one solid, piece of analysis in your toolkit. And, as we say, 1 out of 30 people will have 2. So it's a kind of an inducement to get to know more about Parivartana Yoga because it is such a common configuration. So, there is some uncertainty or variability in Parivartana Yoga because house lords, they exchange houses, yes, and there's some sort of fine points about this, which I'm not going to get into in this presentation, but you can have a planet in its own degree, and it could carry that same degree to the other house when it does its exchange, like in your virtually in your mind's eye. Or it could step into the footstep, the degree position of the other planet. And choosing, depending on which way you choose to go with this, you may, appreciate the nuance of different planetary positions, starting and post-exchange in the other sign.
Alan, may I interrupt you, please?
Yeah.
Are you referring to nakshatra positions?
No, purely degree position.
Okay. For the degrees of the nakshatras.
No, well, there are degrees. In Western astrology, there are degree positions for planets, irrespective of nakshatras being a known factor.
Okay.
Forget about nakshatras. It's just a degree position. So a planet can move carrying its own degree, or it can step out of its position and take the footstep, if I use that term, step into the degree position of the other planet. So let's say that if one of those is combust, if they exchange, then the other one will be combust as well too, if they exchange into the same footstep. But if the other one takes its own degree, it may end up in a part of the sign that is not combust the sun that was in the other sign. So, I won't go into this further. It's in my book in some detail, just, the possibility of evaluating that. And there are other considerations too. Whether you do or do not take a planet's degree position with it or take the other planet, you may end up in situations of combustion, sandhi, or grahayuddha, all of which may impact upon the avastha of the planet. I mean, if a planet is combust, we consider it weakened. If it's sandhi, we consider it weakened. If it's in planetary war, graha yuddha, we consider it weakened. But that may or may not be a factor depending on whether you choose to have the planet take its own degree into the other sign or take the degree of the planet with which it is exchanging. In a way, I'm sorry I've sort of got into this, but it was a slide I was just going to pass over. But anyway, there's more detail in my book, and anybody who's interested can look at that. So, but I did use a key phrase there. When we look at the planets before and after exchange. So the reality is planets are where they are, where we see them in the chart. But in the exchange scenario, we are looking at where they might virtually be. In our mind's eye, we cause those two planets to flip signs, each into each other's own sign, and thereby achieve some sort of dignity. And in so doing, we've reevaluate the planet. Now it's in its own sign, but there may be other things that are happening as well too. Good things and bad things. It may participate now in yogas. It may suffer from combustion or graha yuddha, or be aspected by benefics versus malefics. Different things happen to planets in different houses. Anyway, these are the considerations that we get into. And by looking at those two planets, so we're dealing with a pair of planets only, and we want to determine which of those two is ultimately the stronger of the two, so that in the interpretation of the Parivartana Yoga, we will have some notion of weight. Is it more this or is it more that, in order to color our interpretation appropriately? So we end up looking at the two planets in exchange, and we try to evaluate them, considering the before exchange and the after exchange states for those two respective planets. Which of them enjoys the best of both worlds, whether it stays where it was or in our virtual mind's eye flips to the other place? What happens? And so in doing that, we evaluate the avastas typically, and we see that one planet seems to be stronger or has less weakness, gets involved in yogas, and enjoys some sort of critical link with some meaningful part of the chart, typically Lagnesh or the moon, or is influenced by benefics more than malefics. Without going further with this, we'll get to some examples here shortly. The avastas, an understanding of the avastas is important in order to evaluate any aspect of the chart, but especially in Parivartana. So, strong planets are those that are in their own sign. And of course, post-exchange, the two planets in Parivartana always end up in their own sign. They don't start that way, but post-exchange they do. But they may have started off exalted. They may have started off retrograde. They may have digbala before or after exchange. That's another factor. They will never become debilitated, but they might have started off debilitated. They could be combust before or after exchange. They could be in graha yuddha before or after exchange. They could be eclipsed before or after exchange. These are all the sort of standard definitions for strength and weakness. And moon, of course, is strong when it's more or less full, weak when it's more or less new. So let's dive into an example, the first of, 4 or 5 examples. So Indira Gandhi, a prime example in a rare case where you actually have 3 Parivartanas. So here's Saturn in Cancer, the sign of the moon, and here's Moon in Capricorn, the sign of Saturn. So there's an exchange there between 1st and 7th lords. Then there's another one here, Mars in Leo, the sign of the Sun, while the Sun is in Scorpio, the sign of Mars. And now you have an exchange between lords of 2 and 5. And then a third, Venus in Sagittarius, the sign of Jupiter, while Jupiter is in Taurus, the sign of Venus. And now you have an exchange between 6 and 11. So when we look a little closer at that, then we're going to just tear these apart and analyze them separately. An exchange between the 1st and the 7th. The 1st and the 7th are both positive house lords. So 1st and 7th exchange, this is what we call a Maha Parivartana Yoga, one of the positive Parivartanas. So then we start analyzing what is going on with Saturn, with the moon. So Saturn is here in the 1st house. There's a Papakartari going on here with Mars and Ketu on either side. As far as the moon goes, it is newish. Here's the sun, so the moon is only like 60 degrees away. So that's considered still to be a somewhat weak moon. Anything less than 6 tithys is weak. So the moon is relatively weak, although it is aspected by Jupiter. Post-exchange, when Saturn ends up in the 7th house, it gains Digbala. And basically on the basis of that, we would say then Saturn becomes the control planet. But the basic themes are going to be 1st house and 7th house, because these are the 2 participant planets. 1st house is about public image, fame, health. 7th house, marital status, diplomatic relations. Many other things, but we're picking and choosing here. So then if we dig into, okay, exactly what happened in her life, first house, basically, she was a woman of great charisma. She was the first female prime minister of India and one of the few, major politicians who was a woman. So she had the charisma to get there. She was a lifetime politician, the longest serving prime minister of India. And yet she had many personal health issues. That might come courtesy of the Parivartana Yoga. Seventh house issues, there were many. She was married to a man who was an alcoholic and a womanizer. So her relationships were not, her marriage was not happy. But even relationship outside the personal, on a broader level, on an international level. She was the custodian of two major wars with Pakistan and China. And she presided over very volatile foreign relations where she, ponied up with Russia, much to the irritation of America in the day. So these major themes played out courtesy, in part from the Parivartana Yoga inner chart. Then if we go to the second one, the second Parivartana involving Mars and the Sun in the second and the fifth, so this too is a Maha Parivartana Yoga because it involves two positive house lords, 2 and 5. Now Mars in this case is ordinary. Sun is ordinary as well too, but it's aspected by Mars. So we might say in this case, Mars disposits and aspects the Sun. So Mars is, for that reason, stronger than the Sun. And Sun is also aspected by Jupiter, that's a positive thing. Sun and Mars, what they have in common, they're both Kshatriya planets, ruling class administrators. But because of the fact that Mars both disposits and aspects, it's a one-sided aspect, Mars aspects the Sun, it becomes the control planet. But the major themes are going to be second house and fifth. Second house is about family, education, finances, speaking ability, oratory. Fifth house, children, creative work, and ministry of some kind. So we look into the details and we see that, she was born into and perpetuated a political dynasty. Daughter of Nehru, the first, prime minister of India. And she continued that heritage, and then she continued it with her sons as well too. One who was her heir apparent, and the other one was kind of, destined to be, but things went sideways. She had a good education. She studied in England. She was a history major. Second house, finances, economics. Although she was, comfortable, economics were a big thorn in her side in her rule of India. She had a great difficulty with that. The fifth house, politically, it can reflect the holding of ministerial roles. So she had many challenging roles, but successful. And the whole thing with children, very mixed results with respect to that. Sanjay died in a plane crash, and Rajiv was assassinated. So, some mixed reviews around that whole thing. But those are major themes in her life. Then we have the exchange of Venus and Jupiter in houses 6 and 11. So this is a negative house. The 6th, involved with any other, becomes a Danya Parivartana, troublesome. So we look at the component parts. Venus, okay, it's in the 6th. But what's troublesome about that is it's on the Rahu-Ketu axis. Jupiter is retrograde, therefore bright and strong, but it's aspected by a malefic. But it's elevated, and the thing is, other than the aspect from Jupiter, it's not really tortured too much. It is retrograde, strong, aspected by the Sun. But Venus on the Rahu-Ketu axis, because of its Trikashtana position and the Rahu-Ketu axis, which is nothing but negative, makes it weaker, therefore Jupiter is stronger. So the key things then are going to be 6th house, which is organized labor, police and military, servants or employees. 11th house, social goals, friends and enemies. And so the 6th house, well, she was known for being very tough. Strong arm tactics. At one point, India was under martial rule. She used the police as, control force within the country and the military at the borders, and was not afraid to, mix it up with neighboring countries. The so-called Indira doctrine was established regarding India's borders, respectively, with China and with Pakistan, and she was prepared to go to war on those principles. But at 11th house, I mean, she was a social activist and really intended to raise the level of the living standards for all of India. She was very engaged in distributing land and seeing equal pay. She nationalized a huge number of industries in order to make things more competitive and equitable. But her fortunes really fluctuated. You know, if you think of the 11th house as being, you know, your hopes, your dreams, your ambitions, things really were wobbly for her back and forth. I mean, she was jailed at one point. She was in and out of power. She had great difficulties. And, you know, we have this term frenemies, meaning friends and enemies. And she had a lot of that. Political alliances that reversed and went bad and vice versa. So she was troubled a lot to that degree. The whole thing, I didn't make a point of it here, but, you know, she was ultimately assassinated by her own bodyguards, who themselves were foreigners of a sort. You know, we always say Rahu Ketu sort of imply foreigners. 6th house is servants or staff, and her bodyguards were Sikhs. And, you know, nothing against that. Of course, that was her choice, but it seems to be reflected in her chart. That was part of the unusual karma. Okay, any question, or will I just move on?
Just move on. You are doing a wonderful job. It is certainly clear. Your examples are superb. I'm thrilled, and people are going to enjoy this.
Okay.
I have a question, Errol.
Okay, good. Thank you for that.
So when you said that Jupiter is the control planet here, in terms of Parivartana between Venus and Jupiter, how do you determine that?
How do I determine that it's the control planet? Mm-hmm. Well, we said earlier that the control planet will be the planet that is either stronger for some reason or less weak than the other planet. So here's the thing. Venus in itself has absolutely no dignity, right? Sagittarius, it means nothing. But Jupiter, by sign it has no dignity, but Jupiter is retrograde. And that's a source of strength. So if I stop right there, for instance, I say that Jupiter is stronger than Venus. Then I'll look at this another way. If I consider that Jupiter and Venus are both afflicted by malefics, I see that Jupiter is aspected by the Sun, which we consider, well, what do we call the Sun? We call the Sun cruel. It's sort of like a mild malefic, mm-hmm. But Rahu and Ketu, they are major malefics on the level of Saturn. So Venus is more tortured than Jupiter is. And meanwhile, Jupiter is stronger than Venus is. And so for two reasons in this case, I elevate Jupiter above Venus. Now, it's not always so clear. Sometimes it's like, really, you know, I can't tell. I don't know what the control planet is. And you will encounter charts like that. But in this case, that particular one is relatively straightforward.
Thank you. I have one more question. Do you also consider Rahu and Ketu in the exchanges of houses in Parivartana?
Do you consider them doing what?
Rahu and Ketu, they say that Rahu and Ketu own Aquarius and Scorpio sign. They are the co-lords of Aquarius and Scorpio. And
oh, okay. No, well, technically they don't own any signs. They are comfortable in certain signs, and even sort of the examples that you give are not universal. For instance, my teacher, Hart Defoe, from his studies with his teacher, Mantraji, had a different sign associations for Rahu and Ketu. And I guess maybe the origins for those are tantric. And so they may be different from other mainstream notions of where Rahu and Ketu are comfortable. So that's a little dubious, you know, to make judgments on those. I mean, I'll make those judgments for myself because I'm a part of a lineage, right? Mantraji, Hart Defoe, Alan Anand. But another student or practitioner might, you know, use a different rule for those planets, for Rahu, Ketu. But they do not own a sign. They might be comfortable in a sign. For example, Rahu, we all agree, is supposed to be like Saturn. Saturn's Mula Trikona sign is Aquarius. So we say that Saturn feels comfortable and enjoys a certain dignity in Aquarius for that reason. Similarly, we say that Ketu is like Mars, and Mars owns Aries and Scorpio, but Aries is the Mula Trikona sign for Mars, and therefore Ketu will favor Aries as its place to reside. So we say if Ketu is in Aries, it is in its comfort zone because Ketu is Mars-like and Aries is Mars Mula Trikona sign. So there's that kind of logic that I follow for that process. But on the other hand, I cannot say that Rahu or Ketu own the first house or the ninth house or whatever. They don't own signs. They are comfortable in some, but they're like ghosts that wander from sign to sign.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, you're a good question. Okay, so on to another example. So Errol Flynn. Errol Flynn was a famous movie actor in the 40s, a very notorious guy in terms of living a wild and crazy life. So he has a Kala Parivartana Yoga involving lords of the second and the third. So here's Mercury in Taurus, the sign of Venus, while Venus is in Gemini, the sign of Mercury. So there's an exchange between the second and the third. So this is involving the third house with any positive house, the third house lord with any other of the positive houses. That's a Kala Parivartana, a touch of trouble. So if we examine the components, Mercury and Venus are the components. So Mercury, it's retrograde, that's a source of strength, but it's on the Rahu-Ketu axis, and it's aspected by Saturn, and it's aspected by Mars. Man, this poor little Mercury is attacked by every malefic except the sun. Then if we go to the Venus, we say, well, Venus is ordinary, it's with the two luminaries, and there's nothing else going on. So Mercury has these weaknesses by being troubled by all the malefics, where Venus is really, a little, it's with the sun, it's with the moon, it's a little of negative, it's a little positive. So Venus is kind of stronger, but here I would say Venus is less weak or less tortured. And for that reason, I make it the control planet. The themes, second house, food and drink, powers of speech. Third house, adventure. It's what we call one of those kama houses, a desire house, writing and communication. And so if we get into the details, as it turns out from his biography, he had a very impressive vocabulary. Afflictions to the second house will often indicate substance abuse of some kind. So he was a legendary boozer and a drug user back in an era when drugs weren't even popular. And, second house is education as well, too. And this is a pretty troubled second house. And so he was expelled from school when he was young. Third house, that's the adventure, the sort of, wild adventures. So his nickname was the Tasmanian Devil. He was from Tasmania, the island off the coast of Australia. He had a notorious love life. He was a very passionate guy, always doing, crazy stuff. But he had a great passion. He was an actor, but he had a passion for writing. He was a journalist in his early years. He wrote an autobiography. He wrote a few novels. And so, when not acting, he was writing. Here's another example, a Danya Parivartana Yoga. And that's when we get a trick lord combined with any other planet. And so Shree Rajneesh, well-known, now rebranded himself as Osho. But in the day, Rajneesh was known and also somewhat notorious. And so the combination here is Jupiter and the moon in the third and the eighth. So here's Jupiter in Cancer, the sign of the moon, and moon buried in this grouping in the eighth house in Sagittarius, which is the sign of Jupiter. So now we have an exchange between the third and the eighth. And then if we dig into these, whoops, what happened there? If we dig in, as we said, Danya Parivartana. So look at the component parts. Jupiter itself, well, it's exalted in Cancer. That's a strength. It's also retrograde as well, too. That's another strength. But the moon, it is here with, it is very soon after a new moon, just 2.5 days after a new moon. So just a dark sliver in the sky, and it's associated with malefics, and it's in the 8th house. So there's really nothing strong about the moon. In fact, it's weak by light, and it's afflicted by 2 malefics. So really nothing good about it. So for that reason, Jupiter becomes the control planet. So the major house themes are going to be identified by the 3rd and the 8th. 3rd house, desire, another Kama house. The 3rd is the respiratory system, among other things. I mean, I've picked and chosen, things that are illustrative. Writing is another theme. 8th house, well, scandals, sex, taxes, anything that's unorthodox, irregular, troublesome, that's 8th house material. So, in his life, he was known as the love guru. Nicknames are often indicated by 3rd house. 3rd house is a Kama house, as in Kama Sutra. So he was known for a libertinism, a liberal sex life, and promoting sex life as an active aspect of spiritual practice. What's less well known is that he had asthma, severe asthma, for like decades. And he also had impaired hearing in the right ear. Well, we know that in the chart that the 3rd house is the right ear, the 11th house is the left ear, and every part of the body can be found in the chart. But there's a coincidence that one of the houses involved is indicative of that affliction to the body. And he was a prolific writer. I mean, a lot of this was he either wrote himself or frequently dictated books to be written, but the thing is, he was still the author of them. 650 books. It's phenomenal. He was hugely productive. As for 8th house themes, he was a sexual libertine. There was, that's why they called him the love guru. In India, I think, for many years he was not taken seriously because he seemed to be very much against the grain of traditional spiritual practice. 8th house is associated with other people's money. He was eventually charged with tax fraud. He was also known as the Rolls Royce guru, because he had 108 Rolls Royces or something totally over the top. And he basically had a life of scandal and notoriety. He was betrayed by his followers. He ended up in prison. He barely got out of the country. And once back in India, he basically changed his life and, as I say, rebranded himself successfully as Osho and, started over again. So that's part of that transformation, too, that we sometimes see with respect to the 8th house. Any question on that before I move on? Nope? Okay. And I think this is my last example. So another Danya Parivartana Yoga in the chart of Thomas Merton. Now, Thomas Merton was became famous for a great spiritual book that he wrote called The 7-Story Mountain. And basically, he was a monk, born in France, educated in England, moved to America in his 20s, and he lived a kind of a wild and crazy life with drinking, drugs, and sex in the early years. And then he became spiritual, and then he entered a monastery, and then he took vows of silence for something like 7 years. And during that period was up at 4 in the morning and meditating and praying until noon, and then the rest of the time writing. And some of these books, 7-Story Mountain, among others, became bestsellers. And he corresponded with leading, spiritual luminaries of the day. So the combination, Saturn in Gemini, the sign of Mercury, well, Mercury is in Aquarius, the sign of Saturn. So we now have an exchange between houses 4 and 12. Into the details of these. So this is, because the 12th is involved, a Trikashtana, with any other house lord, it becomes a Danya Parivartana Yoga, a source of some degree of trouble or misfortune. And of course, no life is like completely black and white. but this gives a dose of it. You know, that you could be, like it was successful, you know, a bestseller. And that's obviously a positive thing. And this Parivartana Yoga did not create that bestseller, but it created something else. So that's the thing about chart analysis, as we all know. You don't know the whole thing until you've analyzed all the yogas and combinations in the chart. So anyway, we examine the component parts. Saturn is retrograde, and it is aspected by both Jupiter and by Venus. So, you know, that's pretty good. Mercury is ordinary here in Aquarius, and it's on the Rahu-Ketu axis. But in this case, you know, I do take note of yogas that are formed in the chart as well, too. And here, Mercury and Jupiter form yogas. So there's two Raja yogas formed there. And because these are Raja yogas involving the first lord, then Mercury is not the first lord, but Mercury forms those yogas with Jupiter, the first lord. Then this draws my eye and makes me think, wow, those two planets, Mercury, Jupiter, become quite important in the life because of the Raja yogas they form. And Rahu, Ketu, although they bring some degree of difficulty, Rahu, Ketu also amplify. Note here that Rahu actually is in Aquarius, where it does find comfort and stability of a sort in Aquarius, the sign of Saturn. And that could be the ability to go into retreat for a decade, to take a vow of silence for 7 years or so, and to live that monastic life, which few people could do. Anyway, so for that reason, because of the yogas in this case, I gave Mercury the responsibility of being control planet. In any event, the 4th and 12th houses are still the source of central themes. 4th house, mother, primary education, morals, what we call moksha, deliverance. 12th house, renunciation, seclusion, immigration, you know, foreign travels, and immigration is the ultimate foreign travel where you go away and you don't come back. And then we look into the details. So if the 4th lord is in the 12th, as it is in this case, or the 12th lord is in the 4th, we expect some degree of difficulty for mother. So his mother died when he was relatively young, died of cancer. He had a boarding school education. So the 4th house is education, and the 12th house is a foreign place. So schooling often overseas when you see that combination, 4 and 12. Immigration itself, the 4th house is your home, and if the lord of the 4th is in the 12th, that could mean that you make your home somewhere else. And this is one of the signatures of immigration. Death in a foreign place. 4th house is the final resting place. The lord of the 4th is in the 12th. Again, it implies that death could be elsewhere. And of course, this is all, if the 4th lord was in the 12th, all of that would be true. But when the 12th lord is in the 4th, it's doubly true because you've got a correspondence or a concordance, an emphasis of that very theme, that interchange of 4 and 12. 12th house results, 12th house is loss of self, it's dissolving, dissolution. So he had a very dissolute lifestyle in his youth. The whole thing about retreat and being sequestered from the world, the monastic life of meditation, it's very much a 12th house thing, as is spiritual pursuit, and that's moksha, renunciation, found in the 12th house. And this whole notion of being a spiritual ambassador. The 12th house is the place of renunciation and spiritual work, surrender, and it's also the foreign entity. It's the relations with foreigners. Many a time a rectification, I've nailed it because of some involvement where a person's either typically immigrated, and if I have that date of immigration, I can almost always do a successful rectification on the basis of the 12th house being so important for immigration. Oops, okay, so that was the breakdown for his chart. And this is now by way of a summary. So overall, wrapping up here now, Parivartana, basically, we are always looking only at the 2 houses that are occupied by the exchange planets. If you have Mars and Saturn in exchange, yes, Mars owns 2 houses, and Saturn owns 2 houses, but they each only occupy each other's house once. So whatever houses they are in, Mars and Saturn, those become the 2 houses that are the focus, not the other 2 houses that they own. It's just the 2 houses, the occupants of the 2 houses that are in exchange. Those are what establish the primary themes. So it's really quite simple, and that's why we can, draw out these interpretations, because in any exchange, it comes down to 2 planets occupying 2 houses in each other's signs. It's the symbiosis of those 2 house meanings that provide the interpretation of the yoga. And I, had to do an awful lot of thinking as I wrote this book for what all these combinations of 3 and 8 or 4 and 12 or 1 and 7 might mean, all the possible manifestations. It was a great exercise, but a lot of thought as well too, and an understanding of house meanings. So there's the 2 key houses identified by the planets occupying them, the exchange planets occupying. Then the avastas are important. Those 2 planets, and this is true of everything in a chart. Every yoga you analyze, Chandra Mangala Yoga is very common. In one chart out of 6 will have a Chandra Mangala Yoga. And yet not all Chandra Mangala Yogas are equal. Mars could be debilitated, exalted in its own sign. Moon could be debilitated, exalted, or its own sign. The moon could be dark. Mars could be retrograde. There's all kinds of variables. And being aware of those and considering them when you look at a Chandra Mangala Yoga helps you realize there are many different levels of Chandra Mangala Yoga, never mind what houses they occupy. So the avastas are very important, and with Parivartana Yoga, it's, the standard rules for there are certain things that make planets weak, there are certain things that make planets strong. Consider them all. Consider which of those 2 planets is the stronger of the 2, and that helps you determine the control planet, and that helps you determine a bias in the chart for which way the interpretation of this yoga must go. Other planets contribute, of course. If you're in the presence of malefics, it's going to be problematic. If you're in the presence of benefics, it's going to help. So, and yogas are formed too. When you pre-exchange or post-exchange in your mind's eye, yogas will form. You need to consider all those as well too. And when you exchange your planets, you can choose to take their degrees with them and transpose them into the other sign, or you can simply trade exact places with the other planet and step into the footprint that it currently occupies, the degree that it's in. And that may change the interactions with other planets as well too. So the whole of all this helps you develop a nuance for how to interpret all these various combinations. Again, 66 combinations possible in all charts that you might see. And the important thing is that almost every second person has a Parivartana Yoga. And so there's a cover for this book, which is available on Amazon and other sites, either as a digital copy, very inexpensive, or as a paper copy, very inexpensive as well too. And in the course of reading this, of course, you now have a Bible then, which allows you to look up the meanings for every single combination, all 66 combinations. But along the way, you'll learn a bunch of other principles, the avastas, how to evaluate planets as a whole in any yoga. That is, a general learning experience. But with Parivartana in particular, there's nothing else like it. And it's what encouraged me to write the thesis in the first place and then go on to the book, because there is nothing other. Paladipaka has 2 or 3 pages of Parivartana, and that's it. That's all. Now there's a whole book for students to utilize. And every second client will pull this book off the shelf, because 43% of all clients have a Parivartana in their chart. Okay, enough for the commercial.
Thank you so much for this. This certainly has been very clear, and I'm quite confident that there will be a number of people clicking into Amazon. I will encourage that, believe me. I have no more questions. I think giving us a taste, as you promised, most certainly you've satisfied me completely. Vidhan, do you have any questions at this moment?
No, I'm good. Very interesting session. Thank you so much, Alan.
Yes, thank you for your attention, your good questions too. I always enjoy fielding questions from people. It helps to break things down. Thank you.
Well, Alan, thank you. A great contribution you've made.
Thank you both.
Good night now.
Okay, bye for now.
Okay, now we're done.